Roman Empire was home to an extraordinarily diverse population. In Rome alone, on any given day, someone walking through the city's various quarters would have encountered people of an astonishing range of social, ethnic, racial, linguistic, and religious backgrounds. The multicultural character of Roman society became only more pronounced as the Romans expanded their territories throughout Europe, Africa, and Mesopotamia. In the previous unit, we focused on art and architecture of the Romans, who embraced the values and gods of the classical world through the 4th century. Now we will turn our attention to the growth of Christianity from the time of Christ through the 5th century. While being very Roman in style and technique, we will see how Jews and Christians appropriated and transformed Roman art forms for very distinct purposes. In the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, Christians, Jews, and Romans coexisted throughout the Roman Empire, sometimes in peace and other times in open hostilities. The religious tolerance that the Roman Empire sometimes practiced can be seen in the community of Dura Europos in Syria. In this community, a Roman garrison town existed almost literally side by side with a Jewish synagogue and a Christian community house. What makes this remarkable is their existence in a Roman-occupied town. Due to the nature of the area with the constant shift of dominant power structures, Dura Europos soon fell again to another invading power in the late 3rd century AD. The synagogue and the church were part of the city that was buried in an attempt to fortify the walls of the city against the attacking Sassanids from Persia. When the city fell, the buildings remained buried until the early 20th century. After World War I, when the Ottoman Empire had fallen to Allied forces, British troops discovered wall paintings in the buried portion while exploring the ruins of the ancient city. French and American teams of archaeologists began excavating the site in the 1920s and 30s, and the research continues today. The discovery of the paintings in the Jewish synagogue and Christian house church have led scholars to reevaluate how figurative work formed an important part of Jewish and early Christian religious art. It is important to note that the figure of God is never depicted in Jewish art except as a hand emerging from the heavens. The scenes are presented in a stylized format, never indicating movement. Why would Jewish artists choose to depict images in this way instead of in the style of the Greeks or Romans? Could it be that they were trying to follow the 2nd commandment, which states, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them." We know that Jewish rabbis interpret the laws of the Old Testament, giving the people specifics and exceptions. Maybe the rabbis allowed images as long as they did not show action and were not so lifelike. Could these Jewish scenes of the Old Testament and rules about figuration have influenced early Christians as well? This multicultural influence is evident in all the murals in Dura Europos. The figures depicted also show a certain likeness to the figuration of the late Roman Empire. For example, the chariot procession from the Arch of Septimius Severus, made in 203 AD, shows figures wearing Roman togas. This imitation of Roman guard will be seen in later artworks and shows the long-lasting impact of the Roman Empire on subsequent generations. The catacombs show the use and reuse of Roman iconography as Christians adapted Roman images to create a visual vocabulary for their new religion. Let's compare the image of the youthful Christ as Good Shepherd from the catacomb of St. Peter and Marcinellius, the Christ enthroned from sarcophagus of Junius Bassus, and the small sculpture of Christ seated. All 3 images show a youthful figure of Christ. The detail from the sarcophagus and the small sculpture present Jesus as an enthroned Caesar. The artists have acquired a Roman motif and adapted it to fit a new meaning and a new context. The catacomb figure reflects a more humble origins of Jesus. Perhaps this is also a direct translation of the figure and an attempt to focus on the humble status that Christ represented while he was on earth. He was, after all, a carpenter. Christianity has always appealed to those in the lowest social classes because Jesus himself was born, lived, and died in relative poverty. Perhaps the wealthy patron who commissioned the sarcophagi showed their own support of the new religion of Christianity with these visual references to important biblical figures. This is definitely true of Junius Bassus, who was prefect of Rome in charge of the military forces of the city. The image of Christ as Sol Invictus from the Mausoleum of the Julii in Rome shows a Christ who looks like a young pagan god. Yet the mosaicist has also shown the figure with the Christian cross, the symbol of salvation, and a halo indicating even more clearly the importance of the figure of Christ. Once again, the richness of the mosaic materials suggests the rising importance of Christianity within Rome itself. In 315 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Toleration, which gave Christians the right to follow their religion openly, but he did not outlaw other religions. Although Christianity became the official religion of the empire in 325, Constantine did not have himself baptized as a Christian until he lay dying in the year 337. After Constantine recognized Christianity, he decided to build a new Christian city. He chose the site of the ancient city of Byzantium, which lies on the Bosphorus Strait. He renamed the new city after himself, calling it Constantinople. The city would become the capital of the eastern half of the Roman Empire when it was split in 395. When Constantine granted Christianity legal status in 325, Christians could practice openly with no fear of reprisal, and artists could seriously search for the appropriate visual vocabulary for their iconography to gain even more converts. Architects could begin serious construction projects for Christian places of worship, that is, churches. The mosaic of Christ as Good Shepherd in the mausoleum of Gaia Placida in Ravenna, Italy, illustrates even more clearly the imperialization of Christ. We see him here still as the young, beardless shepherd, but now he wears the gold and royal purple mantle of imperial Rome. There is still a naturalistic blue sky and an attempt at shading of the rock. The figure of Christ is regally enthroned, yet tenderly guarding and securing the flock. This youthful figure holds his cross, his symbol of salvation, and looks out at the viewer while the sheep look towards him. Possibly a visual device to hold the attention of the faithful and guide them towards salvation, the mosaicist created an image of the imperial yet divine ruler, Christ as emperor and God. Built then 100 years after the mausoleum of Gaia Placida, circa 504, the Basilica Church of Sant Apollinare Nuovo, also in Ravenna, shows how the style of depicting Christ was changing. The story of the miracle of the loaves and fishes shows a rigid formality and a compression of space. The figures have morphed into symbols rather than illusionistic bodies. The progressive disembodiment and flattening of figures shows the slow transformation of the art form. This new two-dimensional art form was developing into a style of glowing, otherworldly magnificence and leaving behind the image of Christ as a common, poor shepherd. Like mosaic icons, Christian architecture was also profoundly changed by Constantine's recognition of Christianity. Instead of the humble community house churches constructed on the outskirts of the Roman Empire, like the one in Dura Europos, or chapels carved out of the tufa of catacombs, great basilicas and shrines rose over the sites of Christian martyrs. This reconstruction drawing of Old St. Peter's Basilica shows a resemblance to the Roman basilicas, which were the seat of justice from which emperors ruled the Roman Empire. The church was built on the site of the Circus of Nero, and according to the church tradition, the place where Peter was martyred and buried, and thus Old St. Peter's Basilica represented a link between earthly justice and heavenly justice. The early church fathers sought to show the spiritual lineage of the Catholic Church as descending from St. Peter, whom Jesus told, "Upon this rock I will build my church," and the legal lineage descending from Constantine and the Roman emperors before him. For centuries, this church stood as a symbol of the political and religious power of the Roman Catholic Church. Practically, the basilica was a more efficient structure to accommodate large congregations of Christians who gathered to worship there. Old St. Peter's Basilica became the model for basilica churches built all over the Christian world, and most contemporary churches still echo some of its archetypal architectural features. Christian worshippers would have entered the church through a gatehouse into an open courtyard called an atrium. Across the atrium, an entry porch called a narthex formed the entrance to the sanctuary. Through the narthex, the worshipper entered the high nave, or main sanctuary, which was lit by clerestory windows. Two aisles, formed by pillars or columns, flanked each side of the nave. At the end of the nave was a transverse, or crosswise section called the bema, which ended in a semicircular apse. All these architectural features functioned to focus the congregation towards the apse at the end of the structure, where the celebration of the ritual of Mass was performed. This was a distinct change from the pagan temples, where worship was performed by priests, with worshippers going in and out all the time. By contrast, the Christian congregation gathers together to follow a carefully conducted ritual in a participatory fashion. A circular or central plan building called Santa Costanza was used as a tomb for Constantine's daughter. The central rotunda of this building was surmounted by a semicircular dome, which was surrounded by a circular ambulatory or walkway. This mausoleum also had the acquired iconographic program designed to show the religious relationship the emperor's daughter Constanza had with Christianity. The 12 columns surround the interior rotunda, which housed her sarcophagus, a reference to the 12 apostles. The columns show the imperial lineage, as they are Corinthian columns removed from an earlier Roman building. The interior mosaic program shows a rustic scene of wine production. It could be easily suggested that this is also a reference to the Eucharist, the wine turned into blood of Christ, and a further reference to the theme of redemption. Pagan themes and classical forms continue to appear in early Christian art. In the luxury arts, this ivory carving of the priestess of Bacchus is indeed pagan. This leaf from the diptych Psyche is a representation of a pagan priestess offering to the Roman god Jupiter. The date, circa 400 AD, does indicate a certain defiance and resistance to the Christian faith. But in this slightly later ivory, the coffin details a New Testament version of the crucifixion. In this plaque, the artist has conceived in narrative format some of the key events of the Passion of Christ. To the left of the crucifixion hangs Judas, his suicide a testament to his regret, the reward for his betrayal. Next to Judas stand the Virgin Mary and Joseph of Arimathea, who provided the tomb for Jesus' burial. And finally, on the right side of the crucifixion is the Roman Longinus, in the act of piercing the side of Christ with his spear. The artist has created a narrative format, the doctrine of Christianity, salvation, and redemption. The artist has also perhaps shown the diversity of this new religion by showing the Roman Longinus. According to the tradition, Longinus later converted to Christianity. These are the themes that became very powerful images and teaching tools for the new religion. The vast illiterate majority was able to understand and believe based on the images they saw. In the centuries following Christ's death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven, Christianity took root and spread across the Roman Empire. Sometimes, as seen in the city of Dura Europos, Jews, Christians, and Romans coexisted peacefully and shared ideas about how art should be made. Early Christians borrowed Jewish stylistic traditions for representing figures in a rigid, formal, and flat style so as not to break the second commandment. They also appropriated Roman imagery, converting images of pagan gods into representations of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. Both the art and architecture of the early Christian church represent the humble beginnings of the religion that was shared by the most common poor people who lived much like Jesus did when he walked the earth. When Constantine legalized Christianity in 325, the religion gained political power as well as recognition. No longer a cult of the poor, Christianity became a ruling force of the empire. Architecture and art in the 4th and 5th centuries demonstrate this change in the religion. Jesus is no longer depicted as the lowly shepherd, but as the powerful emperor with divine authority to rule the government and the church. The church, once located in a humble house, was now transformed into a grand basilica as seen in Old St. Peter's, which guided the masses to focus on the ritual of Mass instituted by the Roman Catholic Church. Just as the artists of the early church appropriated pagan imagery, 4th and 5th century architects appropriated spaces previously dedicated to pagan rulers and converted them into sacred spaces. Some imagery, such as that in the Church of Santa Costanza, retained hints of its pagan heritage and communicated dual meanings. These programs of architecture and iconography, established during these early centuries of the Christian Church, would have lasting influence for centuries to come and continue to echo even today.